Hey there, it's the Board Game Bandit with another edition of One Gamer's Journey, and today I'm going to be talking about Abandoned Ship. Abandoned Ship is an older game. It came out in 2008, and it's for 3 to 7 players, published by AEG and designed by Dr. Reiner Knizia. I didn't know who Reiner Knizia was back then, but I certainly do now, and what I would learn over the course of owning this game is that there's a lot more involved than what it appears to be at first glance. With a Board Game Geek complexity of 1.22 out of 5, this may be the lowest games in terms of weight in my collection, and there's nothing wrong with that. It makes it a great family game, and that's what the few reviewers who have talked about this game have said. Although I think there is a lot more to this game, and I think the fact that it is so light may have contributed to the fact that it wasn't as adopted as it should have been. Because I'm talking about this game now, having had it in my collection for quite some time, obviously I'm going to be a fan of the game. But why is that? That's what I'm going to talk about today. As a 7-player game, Abandoned Ship has a very flexible player count. It can support large crowds well in a short amount of time. The game only takes about 30 minutes to play, and the fact that it has 7 players but does not add to the overall game length is fairly significant. Usually a game will get longer the more players are playing, but Abandoned Ship will actually take the same number of turns most likely. It just depends on who is taking those turns. To win the game, you are trying to get the most points, and you'll do that by saving the rats from a sinking ship. There are 7 rats, 1 in each of a different color, that will be drowning over the course of the game. Each player will receive a lifeboat with 3 of those 7 colors, indicating which rats they're going to want to save in order to score points. Any rat who drowns will die and will not score points, so you'll want to move your rats up the ship and into the safe zone in order to score. However, the first rat who survives is not going to score any points, and then scoring will begin after that. The first rat will receive 5, the second rat will receive 3, and the last rat will receive 2. Additionally, there are several spots with a cheese token. If you land exactly on that spot, you will get to claim the cheese, which is worth 1 or 2 points, and also contributes towards the tiebreaker at the end of the game. The gameplay itself is very simple. There are 7 dice, 1 for each color, plus 1 white wild die. The current player is going to roll all the dice currently in use and select 1. That dice will be discarded at the end of the turn unless it has a special symbol indicating otherwise. The color of the die determines what rat will move that number of spaces, although there are circles on some die indicating that it can be applied to any rat, just like the wild die. The dice themselves vary by color. Some faces of the die will allow you to reuse it after that turn, others will make it wild, some will anchor a rat back to the previous rat, some will jump a rat forward to the current rat. After a die is used, it is taken out of the pool until there is only 1 die left. At that point, you will flip over a sinking token and reveal how much the ship is going to sink. In my edition of the game, and I understand that this is different based on several rulebooks that I've seen online, the rats start at space number 10. The sinking, however, starts at space 0, and the token indicates how much the ship will sink. Eventually, it will catch up with a rat or 2, killing a rat if he is the sole person in last place and taking their die out of the equation. And that's really the entirety of the game. But as I mentioned before, despite having a very low complexity gameplay, there's a lot to think about Abandoned Ship. This became very apparent to me when I decided to make my own computer version of the game. As I mentioned before, I have a background in artificial intelligence, specifically with modeling AI agents after human emotions, and I wanted to see how that would work for Abandoned Ship. The first thing to note about this game is that there are very few points to actually be scored. Something I always tell new players who tend to enjoy this game a lot is that whenever possible, you should always go for the cheese, regardless of whether or not it's your rat. It doesn't have to be your rat in order to score points, but by moving a rat forward, you're keeping a rat alive and making it more likely that someone else is going to score points. Usually, if someone fails to get the cheese, they either aren't paying attention or don't understand the core concept of this game, and that's usually a good indication that I shouldn't be playing anything else with them that's a little heavier. But most of the time they do understand it. The fact that the first rat who makes it to the end doesn't score any points is very interesting. Sometimes people will be afraid to move their rat up that far ahead because someone else can go and finish off that rat, and you would lose potentially 1/3 of the points you'd be able to score. Not exactly 1/3 of the points, but 1/3 of the source of the point. Losing your rat is obviously very bad. It's actually possible to end up with no points entirely in the game. But I decided to test this theory anyway. I had wondered if you, in general, put your rats in an overall position to be among the second or third rat to make it off the board, you'd be the ones occupying the first and second slots, and maybe that would be enough when sprinkled in with a little bit of cheese. And that was part of the reason why I programmed the game, to see if this type of aggressive personality and fearless personality would actually make a difference. As it turns out, it really does, and for a couple of reasons that might escape the casual observer. For those who don't know, Dr. Knizia has a PhD in mathematics, and it tends to show in each of his games, even one as light as this. There are 7 rats and 7 lifeboats. The colors are divided such that no 2 colors will appear on more than one lifeboat. If red and orange are reflected together on one lifeboat, there is no other lifeboat where they will be together. Thus, each color appears with 2 other colors once and only once, and every color is represented 3 times. With 7 players, this is great because every color is equally represented, and you'll have unofficial teammates, but you don't know who they are. From an observation standpoint, this is a very entertaining game because you don't know who is rooting for what rat, because the lifeboats are always face down. You can try and observe some people's behavior based on what rats they're trying to save and how far they are moving. If there's a selection of dice where you can move someone a little bit or someone else a lot, it could be very telling what someone is trying to do. At the same time, maybe they're trying to slow another rat down by taking their die out of the pool. The fact that you can move any rat, regardless of whether or not you're rooting for it, will allow you to be either vindictive to other players, which can also be emulated quite nicely in computer programming, or just be solely focused on your own. It also seemed like a good game to do random things since there weren't a lot of moves to choose from. Of course, I still programmed it such that they always went for the cheese, because that is rational to do and you should always do that. There is one last rule that comes into play, and it's one of those things where you have to read a rulebook very carefully when you're implementing a game to make sure you don't miss anything. If at any point there are only 2 rats left, both of those rats will advance to the end of the game automatically and fill whatever spot is remaining. If there is only 1 rat in the 5 spot, then the last 2 rats will both occupy the 3. Otherwise, they'll both occupy the 2. This can be triggered by either filling up all but 1 slot with only having 2 rats left, or killing a rat such that there are only 2 left after that. So it is possible for 4 colors to actually score, even though they may not score at the highest rate. Because colors are never shared across lifeboats more than once, what this creates is a scenario where it is in fact advantageous to move all your rats to the end of the boat as quickly as possible. Even if you were to lose 1 of your rats, if the other 2 occupy the 5 and the 3 spaces, you're guaranteeing yourself 8 points, and because of the distribution, no other player will have 8 points. The max they would have would be 5 because they share your first place. Even if they were to get 1 of the other rats in 3rd place, they'd still have 7 to your 8, and with cheese points, you could add a little bit of buffer room. Now, it is possible that they have 2 of their other rats both occupying 3rd place, which would give them 5, 2, and 2 for a total of 9 points, but that is a lot harder to pull off. Particularly if you rush the end of the game, you'll prevent that type of scenario from happening because you won't give the river enough time to catch up with the rats and be killing them off frequently. That seemed to be a pretty advanced strategy for a game that on the surface seems very light, and it was my first clue that there was something more to this game than meets the eye. I've taught this game a lot over the years, and the fact that it's simple has been great for the game. It's really easy to break out a 7-player game, particularly because certain groups of people tend to get attracted to games that have everybody playing together, even though I personally would rather play a game of 3 and a game of 4 than a game of 7. But Abandoned Ship just did this so nicely, so much so that people would remember it years after, even people who weren't that involved with gaming. I remember playing this with one of my family members several years ago before I even moved down to North Carolina. And just a couple of months ago, we were talking about games, and one of my brothers mentioned that he was fond of the game where you're drowning rats off the ship. Most of my family would admit to the fact that I teach them too many games and that gets frustrating for them, so the fact that they ever remembered one game in particular, and especially fondly, really speaks to the character of a game and the audience that it fulfills. I've always felt that simplicity doesn't take away from the elegance of a game, and that's what Abandoned Ship to me is. It's very elegant. It seems like a kid's game, and kids can play it effectively, but it also can scale up and require you to think a lot more than you would think you'd have to. I had so much fun implementing this game. Given how obscure the game seems to be, it only has 865 votes on BoardGameGeek, which is nothing, It's quite possible that I have one of the only copies of a computer program for this, maybe even the only copy in the world, and that's kind of exciting. But what I've always enjoyed about my program is how I've come to see the AI that I created come to life in the various people that I played with. Even though the rats are just meeples, for whatever reason, people become attached to them. And one of the AI agents that I tried to create was someone who would want to try and save all of their rats. They didn't want any of them to die, even if they didn't score. Other players may recognize that there is a lost cause to a rat and focus on maybe salvaging the other two. But it's a very human thing to try and protect all of these things and just play for the long game. Maybe you're optimistic that things are going to turn around and all of your rats are going to score. I personally fall into the category where I'm much more pragmatic, and if I realize that someone is a lost cause, I'm just going to leave them to die and try and save everyone else. If I don't do that, I'm worried I might not wind up with any points. And I definitely saw this gameplay in the types of people that I played with. There's even a push your luck aspect to this game. You don't know what the sinking tokens are going to be and what order they're going to come out. There's a 3, a 4, 2 5s, 2 6s, a 7, and an 8. Sometimes it will be mathematically impossible to lose a rat. Sometimes it's guaranteed that you're going to lose one rat, but you don't know who it's going to be. Other times, you're not entirely sure, and you may decide to risk it, hoping that there's going to be a low number in order to save your rat. Another interesting area of the game is the white die. You could build an entire strategy around dice management for this game, and I think that's where it really starts to become a Reiner Knizia game, because the dice themselves are not identical. Certain dice have different symbols and have different numbers. They're not all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Though, to be honest, I never programmed the game to that level where my agents begin to factor in particular dice and the values on them. It was at a much higher level. But the white dice stands out. Because it's so powerful, it can even move someone up to 11 spaces on a 37-space board. That's a lot. It can also anchor any rat back to the closest rat or jump any rat forward. So it's completely plausible to try and use the white dice as often as they are reset, just to take them out and make sure that your opponents don't have this powerful dice. Another understated aspect of this game is managing when the dice are going to reset when the ship sinks. It is possible to try and hurt your opponent by using a dice that won't get removed. What this means is you will pass the dice and there'll still be more than one, so your opponent has very little things to choose from. What you don't want to do is give your opponent a full set of dice and therefore they can move any rat they want. You can extremely hinder them by making sure that they don't get to do what they want. And I've always enjoyed that antagonistic aspect of the game. It was a lot of fun creating an agent that specifically did that when given the opportunity to give a bad hand to someone else, they prioritize that over actually doing what's best for themselves. Except for the cheese, I can't stress this enough, I programmed every agent to always go for the cheese move whenever possible, because that's how it should be. And the fact that I've met people who don't understand that, I find interesting actually. I've gotten such great use out of this game over the years that I began to have a problem. The board that comes with the game actually gets pulled and moved to simulate a sinking ship, and it's begun to show wear and tear. I like this game so much that it's one of the few games for which I have a second copy. I originally bought that as a gift for someone because I thought it would be perfect for their family, before I realized just how damaged my box was, and because I'm very sentimental, surprisingly, I didn't want to have to go through the idea of not having this game, so I bought a second copy and ended up keeping it myself. Does that make me a bad person? Probably, but I don't care. It's still in the shrink wrap, and I probably should open it up just so that I could use it for double play at conventions, but I honestly haven't gotten there yet. Watch as it turns out to be missing a component and I missed my window to get it fixed. That would be perfect. But the story of Bandit Ship is much more than my experience programming the game and teaching it to many people. I've taught it to a variety of different audiences, some at work, some friends, family members, anyone, random strangers, and most, if not all, have enjoyed this game. But what I didn't realize at the time when I first purchased it was how much I would grow to love both the publisher and the designer. This was the third modern game I ever purchased, but as you'll see in other stories, I began to notice that the AEG symbol on many of the boxes started a trend, and I would begin to buy their products specifically because I had liked their games, beginning with Bandit Ship. Additionally, when I got a game like Colossal Arena, and so that 2 of my 5 games are from the same designer, I started to pay a lot of attention to that designer, which is Reiner Knizia, and I love so many of his games and have bought many of them over the years. Most people wouldn't think that a light game like this would have any lasting impact for someone who's supposed to be a hardcore gamer like myself, but that's what I always found interesting about games. There are always going to be some that just resonate with you more than anyone else, and I think this is one of those games for me. I'm really glad that I played it. Had I not played it that day, I don't think I ever would have witnessed this game ever, because it's not talked about a lot. It's certainly not one of the games that Reiner Knizia is known for. It's not necessarily one of the games that AEG is known for. And in fact, besides the person who taught this game to me, no one has ever actually heard of this game that hasn't been introduced to me in my circles. That just shows that I found something special all those years ago. And like I said, I have a program that maybe no one else has ever written, and that will always be special to me. So what's the lesson here? Definitely don't judge a book by its cover, and don't judge a game by its weight necessarily. Even though the gameplay is very simple, there are some interesting things to think about. In fact, I may have spoken more about this game than everyone else on the internet combined, especially since I've gone and read all the reviews that have been posted on YouTube, and everyone just talks about it's a light game, I like it with my family, yeah, it's good. But hopefully, I've drawn attention to the game in a way that has never been done before. So that was Abandoned Ship. This was One Gamer's Journey. Thanks for listening. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and our game has just begun.